Hello, good morning, and thank you for joining us for this installment in the Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta's monthly webcast series. My name is Surisha Ganta, and I'm Counsel and Education Director with PBPA. I'm excited to have with us today Jeremy Hilsman, who is Real Estate Counsel at Co-Companies Public Sector, and also a fantastic PBPA volunteer in general. And Jeremy will be talking to us about licensing agreements with movie production companies, lights, camera, action. But before he talks more specifically about today's substance, I wanted to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about PBPA and our mission. Our mission is twofold, and we provide small community-based nonprofits with free business legal services by connecting the nonprofits with talented and phenomenal volunteer attorneys with the leading corporations and law firms in the Atlanta area. If you're interested in getting more information about eligibility requirements or to apply to be a client, you can find an application on our website. But just in general, keep in mind that our clients are 501c3 nonprofits that are located in or serve the greater Atlanta area, serve low income and disadvantaged individuals, and are otherwise unable to afford legal services. On our website, you'll also find a wealth of resources that are available for free to any nonprofit, and they include articles, past webcasts, and podcasts. And one day soon, hopefully, we'll be able to offer our in-person workshops as well. You'll find all the information on our website and specifically on our event or resource tab. And now just a quick disclaimer, because we are attorneys after all, just wanted to remind you that today's information is general guidance. It is not specific legal counsel. So if you have specific questions, reach out to an attorney to talk about your specific situation. And today's presentation is copywritten by PBPA. Now, Jeremy, I'll hand the mic over to you. Thank you for being here today.
All right, thanks for having me, Surisha. Good morning, everybody. Just a little more background quickly on how I got into this. Coke is the parent company to Georgia Pacific. So I originally, 10 years ago this March, which is scary, started as Georgia Pacific's one of their in-house real estate lawyers. And we had had a constant flow of these types of requests to our company, specifically to film in and around downtown, and in particular at our property. And I would say in the last 3 or 4 years, I've probably done this a handful of times for clients of Pro Bono Partnership. And they're coming up more regularly, which is good. And the reason that they are coming up more regularly is this state is incentivizing productions of various types of films, commercials, et cetera, in our state, and it's providing a tremendous amount of revenue. Some of that revenue is being paid directly to people who either own or rent a property for which they want to use that back as a backdrop for something that they want to film. So I was able to pull off quickly some stats that I found that are already available for 2021. And you can see how big of an impact that it's being estimated that filming has had in Georgia, in particular, just last year, about $4 billion. And these opportunities, at least for some of the pro bono clients I've worked for, have resulted in some pretty nice paychecks for some pretty short interruptions to their operations or occupancy of their space. But just some other quick stats, 2021, again in Georgia, we had 21 films that were filmed here, 45 independent films, a lot of television, a lot of commercials, and what was news to me, even some music videos. In fact, the gym that I belong to in Midtown, oftentimes when we'll have an actor or an actress who is temporarily at our gym who is here while they're filming their film. So you probably have actually seen some of these folks, or certainly you've seen the productions, or at a minimum, you've seen those signs that point people for productions that get posted up in the city of Atlanta. So why don't we skip on to the next slide? So what's the process? It's not overly complicated. There is an employee at every production company that's called a scout. And as the word implies, it's their job to go out and seek locations where they want to film. They're basing those locations based on what the script requires. Well, do I need an office setting? Do I need a field? It can be as generic or as specific as you might imagine. So the scout goes out and tries to narrow down the locations, and then they will contact multiple people. And the reason they contact multiple people is because some folks, including, for example, me, while our company, being a citizen of Atlanta, wants to support the filming industry, we in particular have a lot of unique issues that are fact-based that sometimes prevent us from being able to participate or offer our property or our properties for filming. So for example, the Hunger Games was filmed in part at one of our operating facilities in rural Georgia. We've had some as simple as, we just want to put your building in the backdrop, or because we have some large flagpoles. I think we put up a flag for one of the comic type films for Marvel in the last year. So much of this is not so much the law, it is really fact-based. And so I did, for example, most recently, a license for Paws Atlanta, which you may recognize is a Atlanta-based animal shelter. And so what you have to do, and what I do when representing the client, while sure there's a lot of legal stuff to work through, a lot of this is just fact-based. And most of the time, when you're representing a pro bono client, the leverage of negotiation, if you will, is with the filming company. On the flip side of that, when I'm looking at this wearing a corporate hat for Georgia Pacific, because we are so particular and careful and risk averse with certain of these things, the leverage is with us because we don't need to do this for revenue. But again, I've seen the paychecks that some of the nonprofits are getting. They're ranging anywhere from a few $1,000s for part of a day to 5 figures for a few days. So these can be wonderful, wonderful opportunities for nonprofits to make some quick money, especially during the pandemic when nonprofits have not been able to do in the last several years their normal fundraising type events where we get crowds together. So anyway, these have been great. But again, usually when I'm helping a pro bono client, the form of the agreement is going to come from the filming and production company. May we move to the next slide, please? So the most important thing I think about if you're running a nonprofit or you sit on a nonprofit board and somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want to film this, you want to think about, well, what is the content of this movie? Not just necessarily what they may specifically shoot on your property, but what is the overall theme of the movie? Does that conflict with your purpose? Would it upset the people who are your contributors? Would it upset your board members if what they were filming was completely contrary to the mission and purpose of your organization? So back to the Paws Atlanta example. One of the things we obviously wanted to make sure of is, was this production going to have anything to do that could be interpreted as against the mission of saving dogs? So for example, we wanted to make sure the movie didn't have, for example, anything dealing with abuse of animals. So that's where you've got to get into the facts. The scout should be able to tell you pretty generically, but they're obviously going to keep some detail of what they're filming confidential, because obviously if all the details of a movie gets out or production gets out, then who's going to pay to watch it? So we dig in pretty deep, or at least as much as we can, to make sure. Certainly, for example, in corporate America, one of the things I have to understandably worry about is anti-disparagement. And in a secondary way, that's what we're worried about for you as well. What will disparage possibly the mission and the focus, the purpose of your organization? So back to my private life example, I've got to make sure, because my company is privately owned, that there's nothing in this film that is going to disparage the private shareholders of my company. So this, again, is all very fact specific, and we try to extract as much of this information so that you initially can make the judgment, do we want to move forward and try to negotiate a license? Timing. This becomes very important to the film production company, and obviously on the flip is important to you. The production company is going to want as much flexibility as they can, because they're going to film this film in a sequence of scenes that they put together into a television show or a movie. Obviously, as we all know in our personal lives, there's a lot of stuff out there disrupting normalcy, the pandemic being one of them. And so one of the things that the lawyer helping you, if you have a lawyer, is going to make sure that we tighten that up so that it's not going to interrupt your operations. So both of these are kind of working against the other. And we oftentimes find a very easy way to do that. For example, I'm helping another pro bono client at Pro Bono Partnership where a television production wants to film over 3 days. It got pushed back once because of COVID. And so their contract obviously asked for some additional flexibility. And so we're willing to play ball, and we're, basically said, as long as it's a reasonable time that both parties can mutually agree upon. Because what we don't want is, this is an office setting. This is where this nonprofit comes to work every day to operate. They're going to have some operational disruption. So, things that we do, we choose to have things filmed at night so that nothing is bothered during the day. We try to target weekends if we can, so that you will not have much operational disruption. Let's skip to the next slide. Additional considerations that we have to think about. So much, your eyes will glaze over if you actually decide to read part of this agreement. So much of what this agreement says is the confidentiality, that you're not going to go and disclose the content of this movie, even the concept of the movie. And so much of this language is going to deal with intellectual property rights, so that you make sure that you have no claim for any profits or any rights to this production. And generally, all of that language is fine. But one of the things, of course, I ask is there anything in your office, like do you have a trademark or a copyright or something else that could get picked up in the filming that would diminish your intellectual property rights? The other thing is, some of these nonprofits are nonprofits that provide legal services. Are you going to be able to lock up all your files? Are you going to be able to otherwise put away anything that you wouldn't want to be seen or filmed? Because in most of these cases, you are not going to be allowed to be present during the filming. So we have to take a lot of practical precautions. The other thing is, you got to think about your employees. It's exciting to talk about the fact that some famous actor or actress may be coming onto your property or into your office to film something. But what we're going to have to sign as part of these agreements is a very clear confidentiality provision. So you got to make sure you got to keep your colleagues or employees have to understand the burden and the importance of that. The second thing is payment. You want to make sure that you get paid timely. Some movie production companies are willing to pay a portion in advance, some on the day or days of, with the last remaining generally so many days after filming is complete. And then the things that we worry about as lawyers is making sure that the agreement has appropriate indemnification, release, and insurance. So just to quickly, I know your eyes are going to probably glaze over a little with this kind of stuff, but this stuff is important, because what you don't want to do is, what I say, take a silly risk. While it's nice to get a $10,000 paycheck, what risk did you have to take that? So your lawyer hopefully will be making sure that you have appropriate release language. If they slip and fall, as us lawyers like to generically say while they're on set, that's their risk. They come to the premises or your property as is where is, with whatever faults are there. If they, for example, step in a hole outside that you didn't know about, well, we try as best we can to make sure you don't get to bring a claim against a nonprofit. We ask for indemnification. Indemnification is a pretty simple concept. I always like to describe it as a parent taking their child into the store and the child picks up some glass object and breaks it. And the parent has to, of course, step in and pay for it. The parent indemnifies for the action of the child. So we ask the production companies to indemnify our nonprofit so that if our nonprofit gets sued, let's say an actor or an actress gets hurt, or a crew member gets hurt, or a third party that the film company has engaged to come on and as part of this production, something happens and you get sued. We ask the film production company to indemnify you, which means they have to go into court. They have to spend their dollars on their lawyers protecting you. And then if the court or whatever the jurisdiction is rules in favor of that third party plaintiff against you, the film company has to pay whatever the damages or the verdict is. And we back up that indemnification with insurance, because indemnities, as I say, are only worth the credit worthiness of the person that provides it. These film companies are pretty credit worthy. For example, you wouldn't want Jeremy Hillsman to be your indemnitor or the person providing your indemnity, because I don't have the deep pockets like a film company does or corporate America does. And this insurance that they put in place generally gives you a right to make a claim against their insurance if the filming company ultimately doesn't fulfill their obligations under the indemnity. All right, let's flip on to the next slide. Other things that we think about. Yes.
I have a couple questions going
Sure.
back to some items that were on the last slide. And these came with our pre-registration, actually. One of the questions was talking specifically about insurance and insurance requirements that should be included if they're just leasing a parking lot. Is that a conversation that should happen with the insurance broker, or do you have?
Yeah, so there are, as we all know, there are various forms of insurance. But what you're probably looking for here at a minimum is what we call commercial general liability insurance. And they tend to, in their forms, offer that. And that's what lawyers will generically call slip and fall insurance. So that if somebody gets hurt, and if you get sued or somebody makes a claim against you, you would be able to go against that insurance. Now, there are, of course, lots of other forms of insurance. If, for example, you own your building, and what they do is they burn the building down during the filming, you would have a claim against your insurance for the casualty to your building. The insurance would then go after them as the one that caused the problem. And you would, as we say, subrogate your rights against them. So you wouldn't go after the filming company. The insurance company probably would, but you're going to get made whole by your casualty insurance. The last kind of insurance, that in particular with a parking lot, is one that might be considered additional, would be auto insurance, and whether there are any other kind of auto liability coverages that might give you additional protection. I think that the commercial general liability insurance gives you what you need completely. But the good thing, and when I get asked, my company has been willing to make our risk group available to consult on insurance matters. But generally speaking, it's just the commercial general liability that would cover you. Of course, if they damage your building and they cause a casualty, whether they burn it down, they cause a flood, you would be able to make a claim against your insurance, and then your insurance would go against them for reimbursement. I don't know if that answers that question appropriately.
No, I think it does. And then the next question I had was related to confidentiality and employees of the nonprofit. Like, how should and what should a nonprofit communicate to the staff in terms of what's going to be happening at the facility? And should,
well, the less that you can, the better. Okay. But let's be honest, what usually happens is the production scout shows up, comes in the front door. So for example, when they want to film at Georgia Pacific, they end up going to our property management company on the bottom floor. Well, I suspect that a lot of nonprofits might have an admin at the front of their office, and the production scout comes up. And if this has never happened, it can be very, very exciting. And that particular employee should be immediately counseled, hey, I need you to keep this confidential. It may even be already covered under your employment agreement if you have one with the employees. But quite frankly, I think as long as you communicate to them the importance of why this needs to stay confidential, I think from a pragmatic perspective, you're covered because they're not likely going to be present to see what was filmed. I think here's an extreme example that I was thinking about this morning. Obviously, when the last Harry Potter movie was filmed, one of the most important scenes, and if you'd read the books, it obviously wasn't a surprise. But obviously, we all know what happens to Harry Potter at the end of the movie out in the forest. That would be something, for example, that if your employees were allowed to be present, you might consider having the employees sign confidentiality agreements in favor of both you and even the production company. You're already going to sign one with your nonprofit company on the line on the agreement itself, but you can consider additional measures depending on the facts. If your employees are going to be allowed, because the filming company says they can be, and you also decide that you're going to allow them to be present, you should consult with a lawyer to figure out if you have the necessary confidentiality provisions to cover those employees as between you and the employees.
Okay, so generally speaking, you don't have to have your employee sign a separate confidentiality agreement, but depending on the situation, there might be times when you
Yes.
need them.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the next slide. These are some things that that were brought up to me that I think are great. I think another lawyer has seen some things. And again, this is all very fact specific. So some of the restrictions that we generically into these contracts would be these limitations that you see. Obviously, if you or a nonprofit that, for example, may work around dogs or the elderly or anybody else that might be disturbed by loud noises, or there's a particular fire risk at your facility, you is being filmed out in the woods and it's dry at that time. These are things that you have to be very in the moment to think about. A lot of times we don't want people sleeping on site overnight. We want to make sure that the film is going to wrap up by a certain time. Drugs and alcohol, obviously this could be in one of two ways. It means that you don't want drugs and alcohol being consumed. Obviously drugs probably, but you don't want alcohol being consumed on site because alcohol tends to increase risk. Or it may be that you don't want drugs and alcohol to be part of what is filmed on your site or what is part of the movie. I mean, if you were, for example, a 501c3 that works with issues such as alcohol abuse or domestic violence or other things, tying your boat or your mission to a film that's going to address it, even if it's addressing it in a positive way, you may decide that you need to say no drugs or alcohol in either subject or consumption. And then again, back to the noise, or perhaps back to your mission. And obviously, I'm sure everybody has seen in the press with the movie that was filmed out in California, there was an accident where the gun was supposed to have been cold, I think, as they say in the industry, and it ended up having live ammunition in it. And unfortunately, someone lost their life. So these are additional things that you want to be thoughtful about, not only just for safety, but again, does it go contrary to your mission? This is where we have to be very fact specific and understand as much as we can from the film production company what it is they intend to film on your site, not only that day or days, but also throughout the film. I think, Sarisha, that might be the last. I don't know if there are any questions, but I would say if you are a pro bono partnership client, these licenses are not terribly complicated. They don't take a lawyer who is particularly a real estate lawyer a long time to review and edit. Ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
And along those lines, Jeremy, I would say don't be afraid to question the agreement, because I feel like sometimes when a nonprofit has this big glitzy production company coming to them and says, here, sign, they may feel that they may not have any bargaining power, but it never hurts to ask.
That's correct. And I think that's a very good point. In every instance that I have done it for a pro bono client, we have been able to get there. They have lawyers too, who are former corporate America lawyers, just like me, or big law firm lawyers. They understand that there are compromised positions for everything. But like every form that's put out by anybody, including me, when I'm representing my company, if I start with my form, of course, it's going to have the most favorable terms and conditions for me. But I know where the middle of the road is, and you can get to the middle of the road with these production companies. Everybody that is a sophisticated counterparty, which I will say includes all of you guys, because you have access to good lawyers, they're going to expect some pushback on some of the terms, and we usually can always get to a medium, the right place. Because it's great to get these glitzy paychecks, you just don't want to take a foolish risk.
And we have one question from someone in the audience, which I think is a fantastic question. Are there tax impacts from these type of rentals?
Well, that is a good question for which I probably am not qualified to answer, but I would say you're a nonprofit. This is revenue. Is that treated differently under the tax code than, say, a contribution by a member who's going to get a charitable deduction write-off? So let me just be quite frank. I don't know the answer, but I will get you an answer because I have access to some wonderful tax lawyers within my company and also outside law firms. So good question, one that I will ask and report back to Sarisha so she can come back to the group and let you know what I found out.
And Celia, I think part of the answer to your question is also, would this be considered unrelated business taxable income? And as so many of the answers to these questions today, it depends. If you find yourself having an amazing property and you have tons of production companies coming to you many times a year, and you end up having a regular source of income from this, then this could definitely be considered unrelated business. So feel free to reach out to us when you come to a situation. We can help you further with analyzing what the tax implications are. And Jeremy, we have another question related to parking lots. We often get requests to rent parking spaces in our parking lot. Any ideas on determining the going rate for parking in Midtown? I think that might be more a business question than legal, but Jeremy, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, I think I did a movie license for an organization back during last year, which was in the parking lot as well, and it did involve the right to park. So in that instance, the fee was all inclusive. I couldn't see behind the scenes what parking is. So there is information. So the general rule, and I'm not a business person, but I work with our property manager and our property. We have a parking garage behind our building at Georgia Pacific in downtown Atlanta, very similar to almost parking everywhere in Midtown. So daily rates are pretty expensive, and it would depend on the short term and the number. So the shorter the term and the higher the number, that puts more stress to particularly your operations, the payment should be higher. A monthly parking pass in downtown Atlanta right now costs around $100 to $150. I suspect in Midtown they're anywhere from $100 to $200. And then daily passes, for example, in downtown Atlanta are anywhere from $16 to probably $30. In Midtown, they're probably roughly the same. So it's just, what's the inconvenience? It's a supply and demand issue. And so it definitely is a business question. But if it comes up and you need some more guidance, I have access to several property management companies in Atlanta that might be able to give you some guidance on what's appropriate depending on the facts. It will, of course, be factually driven.
And then one other question we have is about, do you have any suggestions on legalities of storing equipment?
Well, I guess the question is what we will make sure of, if this is what the person is asking, if they're going to store equipment on your property during filming for an extended period of time, I'm going to make sure that you have no liability for that equipment. So that, for example, if the equipment in the middle of the night while everybody's gone and they don't have proper security gets damaged or stolen, that's something that's not going to be your issue. Now, if you're talking about, is it legal for them to store it on the property from just a, let's say, a zoning or governmental compliance perspective, we certainly would put that risk on them, because one of the covenants they're going to make is that they're going to, or promises, is that they're going to comply with the law. I don't know if those two thoughts helped address that particular person's question. Obviously, we would not let them store anything illegal on the property. But outside of that, it's a liability question and also a compliance with the law question, which again, we can address when we understand the facts of what they're doing.
Well, Jeremy, those are all the questions that we have received so far. I think this was a fantastic overview, kind of just very practically and legally covering various factors that nonprofits should be keeping in mind if they're looking at signing a license agreement with a production company. So thank you so much for this presentation.
Of course, my pleasure. Always happy to help.
And thank you everyone for joining us today.